Love is a wonderful feeling that inspires a person to do great deeds, gives them a second wind, and makes them feel uplifted. Unrequited love destroys the meaning of life and can sometimes even become the motive for a crime. The sound vaguely resembled a firework exploding, but it wasn't. A gunshot rang out in a shabby residential building. Worried people stuck their heads out of their doors to see what had happened and whether they had really heard a gunshot. Most of the curious onlookers peeking into the corridor weren't even residents of the complex. They were journalists who had come to see everything with their own eyes. Outside the building, the scene was chaotic. A crowd of about 100 people watched with interest, and a kind of distant horror the unremarkable window of apartment number 24, a few floors above. It was an ugly gray old building with small windows, behind one of which there was neither a global superstar nor a local celebrity. Still, some girls moved closer to the wall beneath that mysterious window and screamed that they loved the bad guys. They begged to see their faces for just a second. Journalists and simply curious passers-by pointed their phones at the window and waited for the person inside to react. Eventually, the window opened, and a soccer jersey was hung out. Half the crowd outside began to applaud loudly, making it clear whose side they were on, while the other half, journalists, police officers, and paramedics, just stood there watching the cheering crowd. On the one hand, they were astonished by the absurdity of the situation. On the other hand, the reporters also expected something exciting to happen. Nevertheless, no one took any concrete action at that moment. There was some movement at the window, and camera lenses immediately focused on the gray rectangle. Everyone froze, trying to guess what would happen next. A head peered out. Everyone expected to see a man, but it wasn't. It was a very young girl, about 15 years old. She held her thumb up as though to show that everything was fine, but her stained face told another story. Her eyes were watery, showing that she had cried a lot in recent hours. Her entire body was tense, as if her life were in danger. The cheerful gesture did not conceal her true state. If you zoom the camera in and look more closely, you can see behind the girl a weapon pointed directly at her back. Then she disappeared, and another 15-year-old schoolgirl appeared at the window, merely waving her hands. A moment later, she was pulled back into the room, and a hand holding a pistol emerged from the opening and fired indiscriminately into the crowd. The shooter was a 32-year-old man from apartment 24. He had actually been holding 4 teenagers hostage there for 100 hours, the longest hostage-taking in Brazilian history, and it did not end the way many people had expected. The entire nation followed the crime in real time. The tragedy caused a wide public outcry in the media, not only because of the incident itself, but also because of mistakes made by the São Paulo police. Eloa, the name of one of the girls being held, had only one chance to save her life. She did everything she could to make the police's work easier, but for some reason, the officers failed to use the opportunity she gave them. Eloa opened the window again and started lowering an improvised rope made of torn bedsheets. The rope was just long enough to reach the ground. While she was trying to untangle the end, the girl was practically lying on the windowsill, giving the snipers a chance to take a targeted shot. But they did not do it. The schoolgirl felt the attacker's weapon at her back and couldn't hesitate any longer. Eloa stood up, stepped back into the apartment, and began pulling the rope up again. Now, there was a paper bag filled with food dangling at its end. It was her only chance at rescue, and it failed. Later, the news channels showed the situation repeatedly. The footage showed a crowd of people watching the hostages' actions with blank stares. They looked up at the window of the residential building as though watching a television screen and did nothing. The fact is that there are specially trained people who can negotiate with criminals. To do this professionally, you need certain skills, such as a high level of emotional intelligence. Imagine that, at an important event, one of the educated and influential guests deliberately mispronounces a word. In that situation, there are 3 basic types of reactions. The first type of person won't even notice the mistake. Most likely, they just missed it. The second type will definitely point it out publicly to demonstrate their superiority and embarrass the speaker. The third type will genuinely smile and try to correct the person discreetly, with as little damage to the speaker's reputation as possible. People of this third type, with strong communication skills, can become negotiators. Such specialists should not ignore the hostage-taker's actions, but at the same time, they do not have the right to confront him harshly about his inappropriate behavior. Their job is to guide the criminal competently toward the desired outcome while protecting human lives. It's an extremely complex art. Just a few words spoken with a certain emphasis can lead to success or cause an operation to fail completely. Unfortunately, even negotiators can't always bring a situation to a positive conclusion. Around 1 p.m. on a Monday afternoon, 15-year-old Eloa Pimentel, her best friend Nayara da Silva, and two of their male classmates gathered at Loa's house to work on a joint geography project. The apartment had a pleasant, friendly atmosphere. The teenagers had just had a snack, and the hostess decided to tidy up quickly. Eloa's younger brother and her parents wouldn't be home until evening, so she felt responsible for cleaning. She put her clothes away in the closet, made the bed neatly, washed the dishes, and returned to her guests. Suddenly, the front door swung open and a man appeared in the apartment. He stood there silently for a few seconds, staring intently at the schoolchildren. His posture was unnaturally tense, and his gaze swept the room as if searching for someone. What disturbed the teenagers most was the fact that the stranger held a weapon in his hand. For a moment, there was complete silence. The stranger himself broke it, saying he had come to take Eloa's life, and that the others were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Then the man rushed at the boys and struck them several times on the head with the butt of his rifle. Stunned, they didn't even have time to react. The two teenagers and Nayara were sitting on the bed and couldn't move when the intruder grabbed Pimentel and cold-bloodedly beat her. Nayara tried to call for help, but her weak cry was interrupted by a shot into the wall. After that, she was forced to stay quiet because she realized the man clearly wasn't joking. His eyes gleamed with rage, and he waved the weapon around as if it were a toy. The first hour of a hostage situation is the most critical. During this time, the hostage-taker experiences an incredible adrenaline rush, almost a euphoria. He feels he has absolute power and control over what's happening. The usual boundaries of reality seem suspended. The fear of death disappears, and a feeling of ultimate exhilaration envelops the criminal, making him feel like an invincible superhero. Such adrenaline surges most often occur in life-threatening situations, for instance during an earthquake when a building collapses nearby. This state usually lasts for the first few minutes of the incident and can continue for up to an hour. Then the adrenaline level drops sharply, and the brain starts sending the body an alarm signal. Shortness of breath, slight trembling and sweating occur, and concentration decreases by about 35%. The brain begins to consider various scenarios and tries to predict the reactions of the hostages, the police, or the negotiators. At this point, the hostage-taker is most dangerous because his physical state has deteriorated dramatically, and any provocation can lead to irreversible consequences. In every such situation, there are three parties: the hostage-taker, the hostages, and the negotiator. The Special Tactical Action Team closely monitored the situation around the hostage-taking in Apartment 24. About 100 officers surrounded the building. The group's command center was set up in the school that Eloa and her 3 classmates attended. The police's main task was to find out what was happening inside the apartment and to try to get all the hostages out alive. The command center focused on developing a strategy, and a crisis response team was called in to try to enter the apartment and disarm the intruder. Several snipers were positioned in nearby buildings to fire if necessary. All these teams had to work together, and now they had to wait patiently for the armed, dangerous, and most likely mentally disturbed criminal to make his demands. In the case of Eloa Pimentel, a fourth party emerged: the press, broadcasting the hostage-taking live. Along with the reporters, a crowd of onlookers gradually gathered outside to watch the hostage situation in real time. This was practically the first time the entire country followed a crime as it happened. The press, realizing the seriousness of the situation, hurried to find information about the girl living in apartment 24. It quickly became clear that she was 15-year-old Eloa Pimentel. The reporters and their assistants swiftly put the pieces together from conversations with acquaintances and neighbors of the main hostage. They learned that Eloa had recently been dating a young man who had apparently been unable to accept their breakup and was now holding her hostage. The correspondents spun this story in every conceivable way and hatched all kinds of theories. They discussed how quickly the lovers would realize they were meant for each other and walk out of the apartment hand in hand. They even speculated about a wedding of the century that might follow the hostage's release. This was the story of two lovers who had not yet learned to manage their own feelings and emotions. The correspondents managed to reach Pimentel's apartment and speak to a young man named Lindenberg Fernandez Alves. This phone call was broadcast live on television. The kidnapper admitted that Eloa was indeed his ex-girlfriend and expressed confidence that events would soon end in the best possible way. How, then, did the information about the hostage-taking reach the public so quickly? One of the teenagers, named Vicar, who was being held in apartment 24, had told his father he would be home by 5 p.m. right after he finished homework with Eloa. However, the boy did not arrive at the agreed time. Concerned by his son's delay, the father decided to check if everything was all right. He went to the apartment door and knocked several times, but no one answered. The man was about to leave when he heard strange noises. He started kicking the door, determined to get into the apartment by any means. At that moment, he heard a warning that if he didn't stop, everyone inside would die. The alarmed man ran downstairs and tried to call the police. He was in luck. He spotted a patrol car in the courtyard and told the officers everything. One of the police officers went to the entrance, hoping to resolve the situation alone, but instead heard threats and was almost shot when the intruder fired multiple rounds directly at the door. The loud noises alerted the neighbors. People began peering out of their apartments and calling family and friends. Information about the hostage situation in Pimentel's apartment spread like wildfire throughout the city. Soon, a throng of onlookers gathered around the building, anxious to see how it would all end. Eloa Pimentel was born on April 5, 1993 in Brazil. She was modest, sometimes overly shy. Her best friend was her mother. Since childhood, Eloa had dreamed of becoming a veterinarian, so she studied diligently to get into university after school. The girl's parents and her younger brother Douglas knew the hostage-taker, Lindenberg Alves, well. It was Douglas who introduced his sister to the man. Lindenberg Fernandez Alves was more than 7 years older than Eloa. When they met, he was 20 and the girl was only 13. He was a big soccer fan, but nearly every game he played ended in a brawl. At the stadium, he met Douglas, who introduced him to his sister. Lindenberg worked 2 jobs, as a courier during the day and a pizza delivery driver at night. At first, the young girl liked the attention of an adult man, but once she got to know him better, she immediately lost any desire to see him. They were completely different: the smart, happy Eloa and the aggressive, hot-tempered Lindenberg. Still, they remained in contact for more than 2 years. The girl's parents disapproved of her seeing an adult man, but it was very difficult to force a 13-year-old schoolgirl to do something against her will, so meeting Lindenberg was little more than a teenage rebellion for Eloa. She could hardly comprehend that such a relationship would lead nowhere good. By the time she did realize it, it was too late. Her parents, seeing that bans did no good, allowed their daughter to see Lindenberg, but only at home. If the couple went out, Eloa's younger brother Douglas always had to join them. Over the next 2+ years, the girl's parents began to see Lindenberg almost as part of the family, since he was always around. They noticed that the man tried to control their daughter in every possible way. He forbade her to interact with friends or go to events without him, and he held her fully accountable to him every single day. Alves himself didn't abide by his own rules. He spent every weekend at the club, but he tightly controlled every aspect of Eloa's life. Lindenberg was a genuine manipulator. He could tell his girlfriend in the evening how terrible she was and that she had broken his heart, then pretend nothing had happened the next morning or drop to his knees begging for forgiveness. This bizarre relationship lasted almost 3 years. One evening, Eloa entered her mother's room and said she no longer wanted to see anyone. She decided to focus on her studies. Her mother supported her, having no idea what lay ahead. Ever since the young couple had broken up, Lindenberg never doubted that he could get Eloa back. He simply began following her everywhere. When Pimentel left school for home, he drove slowly alongside on his motorcycle. He didn't try to talk to her, he just stayed near and watched her. Eloa was terrified. She chose different routes to get home and tried to get away from him by going through alleys or crowded places where it was impossible to ride a motorcycle. But wherever she went, she felt she was being followed. The man started calling Pimentel's home phone. When the girl's mother answered, he warned that he would resort to desperate measures if Eloa didn't come back to him. The woman hung up, paying little attention to Alves's words. The young man had always had a dramatic streak and wanted extra attention, but she thought that was no longer her concern. Eloa already felt like a hostage before she was actually taken hostage. She stood at the bus stop, playing on her phone, when she felt she was being watched. The girl looked around, but there was no sign of the motorcycle. However, she spotted her ex-boyfriend across the street, standing there with raised eyebrows, observing her. Then he dashed across the street and was next to Eloa in the blink of an eye. Lindenberg began saying he had made many mistakes but still loved her. The girl held her schoolbooks in front of her like a shield, praying the bus would come soon. She decided to ignore him so he wouldn't have a chance to twist her words, but her tactic only made Alves angrier. He changed instantly. He started screaming and struck Eloa full force, causing her schoolbooks to scatter on the ground. It was the first time Lindenberg raised his hand against her. Eloa ran home in tears and locked herself in her room. Her younger brother Douglas saw her red, swollen face and tried to find out what had happened, but Eloa kept silent. Douglas already suspected who was to blame for his sister's condition. The teenager berated himself for introducing Alves to his sister and felt responsible for what had happened. When the parents came home, they were furious. They called Lindenberg and demanded an apology. He replied that he could do far worse if Eloa didn't change her mind. With a pistol and a big plastic bag full of ammunition, Alves went to the apartment where his ex-girlfriend lived and took her and 3 other people hostage. Eloa sat side by side with her friends on the bed, trying to calm Lindenberg by agreeing to talk to him privately. She even promised to get back together with him if he would end this nightmare. But the guy lost it. He shouted that he no longer wanted to be near her, and that his only goal now was to take her life. The hostage taker pulled shirts from the laundry and used them to tie up all his victims. He hadn't decided what to do next, whether to make Eloa suffer by killing her friends one by one or kill only her and send her to the other world. He was also greatly bothered by Nayara's presence, as he felt she was a bad influence on Eloa and had encouraged the breakup. Nayara would likely suffer too. The boys didn't like him either. Even though Alves was older, he feared he wouldn't be able to handle 4 teenagers at once. The police's first phone call to the hostage taker was simply to let him know they were listening and wanted to help, and then to discover his basic demands. When the negotiator dialed the apartment number, Lindenberg picked up. On the other end of the line, they could hear someone screaming. The intruder was in the middle of beating his ex-girlfriend. When the police asked about his demands, Lindenberg said he wanted to send Eloa to the other side of the world and hung up. A few minutes later, the door of apartment 24 opened and 2 boys emerged. Their steps on the stairs sped up and the 2 classmates of Eloa ran out of the entrance. Negotiations for their release had not yet begun, but they were already safe. It happened on the first day. The boys had been captive for about 12 hours in the apartment. Lindenberg paced around the room with a pistol in his hand. One of the teenagers, Victor, lay unconscious on the floor. Eloa, who was folding a piece of paper, tried to fan some air toward him so he would come to his senses. The other boy had shrunk into a corner, pale with fear. Pimentel's friend Nayara tried to reason with the unhinged Alves, asking him at least to let the boys go, since they were only there by chance. Lindenberg smirked and asked the girls if they were afraid to be alone with him. He was annoyed by how Eloa cared for Victor, so he suddenly decided to let the terrified teenagers go without conditions. This was the first success for the police, even though they hadn't really done anything yet. 2 of the 4 hostages escaped the fatal apartment alive and unharmed. The authorities immediately surrounded them and began questioning them about what was happening inside. The classmates said the hostage-taker's mood changed from minute to minute. First, he'd yell that no one would get out alive. Then he'd threaten only Eloa. Then he'd say he wanted her to witness her friends' deaths. Occasionally, he became affectionate, reassuring the boys and promising everything would end well because he wasn't a bad guy. But then his eyes would turn bloodshot again, and he'd grow violent toward Eloa. The tactical team concluded that the perpetrator was extremely unstable and that no one knew what he might do next. At the same time, he had already taken the first step toward a favorable outcome, letting some hostages go without being forced. When negotiators do their work properly, the success rate in freeing hostages can reach 90%. The most important thing is to proceed consistently, step by step, so that the hostage-taker gradually abandons his demands and saves the victims' lives. In apartment 24, the phone rang. On his cell phone, Lindenberg, pistol in one hand, picked up with the other. The man was very interested in how the caller got his number, but then he was asked a few questions about Eloa, including when he planned to let the girl go, and was asked to let her say a few words. Pimentel complained to the male caller that she was very hungry, and as the crying girl spoke into the phone, the call was cut off. This wasn't the negotiator's call. A reporter had gotten hold of Lindenberg's number and broadcast the ill-fated call live on television, further complicating police efforts. The media wanted an exclusive interview with the hostage-taker, and the authorities couldn't control the journalist's actions. The media bribed relatives or friends of the perpetrator to get his phone number. They knew it was highly unethical and interfered with police negotiations, but they kept intervening and spoke more than once with Lindenberg. This put the girls' lives in danger. For the media, only the huge ratings of their coverage mattered. Lindenberg, who loved the attention, was eager to talk about how poor and unhappy he was and how many times he tried to talk to his ex-girlfriend, only for her to turn away and refuse to listen. That was the only reason he'd committed this crime, so she would hear him, he claimed. He assured reporters he would soon release Eloa and surrender to the police, but that didn't happen. 30 hours had passed since the hostage situation began in apartment 24. The news channels presented the public with the story of a poor boy who loved a girl and had a nervous breakdown, resorting to desperate measures. The viewers believed what they saw on their screens. Eloa herself was hardly mentioned. Everyone felt sorry for the rejected suitor, who had supposedly suffered an emotional collapse and taken extreme steps. The police were confused. The snipers didn't dare shoot because of possible consequences, and Lindenberg was gradually becoming unhinged. To prevent him from watching TV and learning about police actions that were also being reported in the news, the power to his apartment was cut. The police asked the reporters not to broadcast live and only show the footage after the hostages were freed, but they had no way of making the media comply. It was utter madness. After 30 hours of captivity, Lindenberg started to spiral. He became irritated by the crowd outside his window that not only shouted nice words at him but also insulted him in every possible way. At one point, he opened a window, stuck a pistol out, and fired randomly at the crowd of innocent people. Thankfully, no one was hurt. Cutting the apartment's power was part of a tactic commonly used in hostage situations. It is meant to unsettle the criminal and force him to negotiate. In this case, it worked. Lindenberg agreed to release another person, Nayara da Silva. Her family waited for her at the entrance. The girl was taken to a hospital, though she wasn't seriously hurt. The negotiators questioned her for 6 hours. The student told police that Alves kept her and Eloa in separate rooms, tying their hands and feet and blindfolding them. All day long, Nayara heard the man beating Eloa. The girl pleaded for help, cried, and then would suddenly fall silent. Moments later, the man begged Eloa for a kiss, only to be rejected again and again. These mood swings were attributed to Alves's lack of sleep. He dozed off and on but was still full of energy every morning. The next day, Nayara was awakened at 8:38 a.m. by her grandmother, who told her the police wanted to talk again. The schoolgirl didn't understand what more the authorities could want from her, since she had already told them everything the previous day. The girl and her mother rushed to the command center at her school and heard an unexpected proposal. Nayara's mother's eyes widened. The negotiators said the student should return to the apartment. The 15-year-old, who had just suffered severe psychological trauma, was supposed to voluntarily go back to the very place she had escaped from only 12 hours earlier. But according to the police, it was the only way to save a life, and the girl agreed. Lindenberg said he was ready to surrender but feared snipers. He specifically requested that Nayara and Pimentel's younger brother serve as human shields by walking in front of him at the door. The attacker knew the police would not shoot teenagers. His ex-girlfriend was in no condition to shield anyone because she needed medical attention, so Douglas was supposed to stand at the foot of the stairs, and Nayara was supposed to go to the front door. The girl climbed the stairs, talking on the phone with Eloa. At that moment, the door of the apartment opened and the schoolgirl saw Eloa's face, covered in purple and blue bruises. Before she even realized what was happening, the man grabbed her wrist, yanked her inside, and slammed the door shut. The whole country watched live as Nayara was taken hostage again. The police had made a disastrous decision and gambled with the teenager's life. They took a risk and lost, without giving any real thought to how to handle a situation like that. Lindenberg dictated his conditions, and the negotiators blindly complied. The girls had been hostages for nearly 100 hours. The captor swung between calm and aggressive, assaulting Eloa with his fists, screaming at her and sometimes acting tenderly. It was 100 hours of constant stress, living in terror, facing psychological manipulation, threats, and assaults. Eloa began to lose her grip on reality. During all that time, she never once gave in to Lindenberg. While they were together, he had always been in control. He was nearly 8 years older, manipulative, and forbade everything in every possible way. But now Eloa refused to yield an inch. She slammed dishes, threw anything within reach, and yelled for Alves to kill her or let her go. Lindenberg was shocked. He knew that if the police heard the girl's screams, the tactical team would probably storm the apartment and shoot him, thinking he was beating her. Unsure what to do, he held a gun to Nayara's head and threatened to kill Eloa's friend if she didn't calm down. To prove his point, he punched Nayara in the stomach. It was the first time Alves had laid hands on her. Exhausted, Eloa no longer feared her own death. For the past 90 hours, Lindenberg had constantly threatened her, but she didn't want to be the cause of her friend's death. The girl fell silent and sat down next to Nayara on the mattress on the floor. On October 17, 2008, Lindenberg got a phone call from Eloa's mother. She pleaded with him to release her daughter, saying she would do anything to mend the relationship between the two. But that no longer mattered to Lindenberg. He knew that once it was all over, he would be going to prison anyway, so he bluntly told his ex-girlfriend's mother that he didn't need Eloa anymore. The schoolgirl heard the entire conversation and realized there was nothing good in store for her. When someone has nothing to lose, they are rarely capable of mercy. The two friends clung to each other, sat in front of the TV and waited for it all to end. The man sat down next to them, and at some point, he raised his weapon and fired it into the wall of the neighboring apartment. That was where the rapid response unit was located. This bullet ended up being decisive for the fate of the two schoolgirls. The day before, Lindenberg had told the negotiators that he had no way out and would not let the girls leave the apartment alive. His mind was still torn between an angel and a demon, but unfortunately, the demon was winning. After hanging up, Alves dragged the coffee table to the apartment door and lay down on the mattress to sleep. The girls sat together on the couch, pulled a blanket over themselves, and stared grimly at the TV. Around 6 p.m., the tactical team broke through the door of the apartment. Officials later claimed they only stormed it because they heard a gunshot and had to act quickly. Normally, multiple entries are used simultaneously to ensure the intruder doesn't have time to react and harm a hostage, which greatly increases the chance of disarming him. But this time, the police only went through the front door. They blasted the door in order to disorient and momentarily blind the attacker, but they couldn't subdue Lindenberg in a single second because he had wedged a coffee table against the door. Those few seconds were critical. The attacker turned to the two girls and opened fire on them. At the same time, the rapid response team fired several rubber bullets at Alves, aiming to incapacitate him but keep him alive. However, the attacker fired real bullets at the girls. Lindenberg was thrown to the ground and handcuffed. At that moment, journalists were reporting live on TV that the hostage taker had agreed to surrender. Then came the explosion. A few minutes later, ambulances raced through the streets. It's unclear whether the correspondents genuinely believed in a happy ending to this love story they had been reporting on, but when two bloodied victims were carried to the rescue vehicles, it didn't look like a happy ending at all. The reporters still wouldn't give up. They tried holding their cameras right up against the ambulance windows for exclusive footage, looking more like vultures than human beings. The two girls were taken to a hospital. Nayara had been shot once in the face. The bullet lodged in her jaw. Eloa had been shot twice, one bullet passing through her head and causing severe neurological damage. She was diagnosed with brain damage and placed in a medically induced coma with no hope of recovery. On October 18, 2008, at 11:30 p.m., Eloa died. Several tens of thousands of people gathered to bid farewell to Eloa Pimentel. Her heart, lungs, liver, pancreas, kidneys, and corneas were donated to help others. Her parents decided this was what their daughter would have wanted, to prolong someone else's life with her death. Her friend Nayara da Silva made a full recovery after many operations. She said that even if she had known she would be taken hostage again, she would not have hesitated to go back there to try to save Eloa. The tragedy was widely discussed because of mistakes made by the São Paulo police, and the Brazilian media came under even harsher criticism for interfering in the negotiators' work for the sake of sensationalism. Many media outlets were fined by the government for hindering the official police operation. The trial of Alves took place in February 2012 and lasted 4 days. At the hearing, Lindenberg admitted he had only wanted to spend as much time as possible with Eloa. Their physical contact had never gone beyond a kiss on the cheek, but he was obsessed with the girl and now felt deeply hurt that Eloa was gone. According to the defendant, he shot the girls after being startled by the explosion at the door and had never intended to take anyone's life. Lindenberg was found guilty on multiple counts and sentenced to 98 years and 10 months in prison. However, the Brazilian justice system did him a favor by granting him the right to short-term leave and allowing him to work outside the prison a few days a week. The case of Eloa Pimentel was the longest-running hostage situation in Brazil to be broadcast live. Unfortunately, mistakes were made by many people in this story, and its outcome was tragic for everyone involved. Thank you for watching, and please take care of yourselves.